Skytalker, presented by Founding into Comics.
God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. That is the key to history. Terrific energy is expended. Civilizations are built up, excellent institutions devised, but each time something goes wrong. Some fatal flaw always brings the selfish and cruel people to the top, and in all slides back into misery and ruin. In fact, the machine conks. It seems to start up all right and runs a few yards, and then it breaks down. They are trying to run it on the wrong juice. That is what Satan has done to us humans. C.S. Lewis, in Mere Christianity, chapter The Shocking Alternative, talking a little bit about how man builds gods unto themselves that are apart from God himself. And I've been thinking a lot about this week, about fandom and Star Wars as alternative religion for people. I love Star Wars. It's a huge part of my life. There are times where I sometimes feel as though I am one of those people substituting Star Wars for something higher. I mean, look behind me, right? Like I've got my Yoda bust here, an actual golden idol, if you were, to Master Yoda. And there's something to that. I mean, there's something to be said for the way that Star Wars interacts in our culture and what it is supplanting. But I actually feel a little bit differently about it. I've always looked at Star Wars as something that was like a lighthouse. It was actually casting a light into a darkness that I could not see before. And Star Wars helped me find my way to something higher and to truth. And so we're going to talk about this tonight. And we're going to add in a panel of awesome individuals to dissect Star Wars as religion. We're here joined by the Duchess Dark Light herself, Jessica. Super excited to have you on here. She contributes to Rule the Galaxy. We've also got Ro from the Scuttlebutt. He is here from the Scarif Live podcast. He's going to be joining us here for just a little bit before getting on over to his own program. And then we've got my friend and colleague, Matt Battaglia from Free the People and Bounding into Comics. He is the author of the comic House on Fire, which I believe I gave a quote for, saying it's a must-buy comic for anyone. Matt, am I going to see you tomorrow in Washington, D.C.? Are you going to LibertyCon?
No.
Okay,
Not that I know of.
Then we're not talking about that, people. Weird libertarian conventions in Washington, D.C., which Matt will not be going to. But you can find me at the Grand Hyatt in Washington, D.C. tomorrow, if you happen to be in town. All right, so let's talk religion and Star Wars. J.J. Abrams was in the news this week because Daisy Ridley's been doing her press tour for her new movie, Sometimes I Think About Dying. And she was reflecting on her time working on The Force Awakens with J.J. Abrams. And J.J. Abrams supposedly says to her, this role that you have, Rey, this is not a role in a movie. This is a religion for people. It changes things on a level that is inconceivable. I will stop talking. Jess, what do you make of that comment? And because I know you study religion, you are a Christian yourself. How do you react to that kind of comment?
I don't think the comment was any surprise to me. This is something that I really appreciate J.J. Abrams' kind of using in his view of Star Wars. For just because most people won't know, I have 2 degrees in kind of history, theology, and at that intersection. And so for me, like Star Wars has always been kind of a like viewed through that lens for me. I've always really gravitated towards it because I think that there's something really special, especially in a world that is now very individualistic, to have a franchise that is at least kind of broadly deistic, where there is this idea of God, there's this idea of a higher power, and we see these characters, the Jedi, who have given their lives to this concept. And so for me, like I think that that's a really interesting aspect of the internal story. But then, yeah, we've seen the way that people look at that story and apply it to their lives in sometimes very literal ways. I mean, there are literally people who um, subscribe to Jediism as a religion.
Jediism.
It's just
Yes.
really a fascinating idea,
think-
getting into like what constitutes a religion and how young can a religion be. I mean, this isn't going to predate the maker, which is George Lucas.
And we wrote a little bit about this at Bounding into Comics. I did this for my most recent column. It was in Australia in 2016 that at least 65,000 citizens identified as Jedi on the census. Now, I'm going to say 50% joke, right? 50% maybe upwards, doing it for humor. Some of them aren't.
No, it's
Yeah.
not a joke. And in fact, I actually just got involved. I just connected with a group in the Chicago area where I'm from, that is, for Star Wars fans. And we actually just got together and we were talking about Star Wars and myth. And we watched a lecture that Joseph Campbell did on how George Lucas was using his work on mythology. And this group that I was with met some really wonderful people. And for, a lot of them, I mean, there are different levels to which they, ascribe to this religion, but it is a very real force, pun intended, in people's lives. And it
Guys,
really does make a difference.
what do y'all think about that? I want to just leave the floor open. I don't want to have too much like directing questions in any one direction. So whoever wants to chip in next, what do you think?
Well, I'll go next. I think it's an interesting quote. I think JJ was warning Ray or warning Daisy Ridley about what she's about to embark on. You watch any YouTube person that talks about Star Wars, and what are you going to see behind them? Obviously, boatload of action figures and collectibles and stuff like that. I always say on my podcast, if you cut me, I bleed Star Wars. So it is a serious thing for a lot of people. I can't, I've never met anyone that treats Star Wars as an actual religion. I think I would probably be more friends with the 50% plus people that put it in as a joke. But it's interesting. I mean, nothing will surprise me. I think I mentioned this before we started rolling. I thought JJ might have mentioned the religion thing as a metaphor, kind of a little bit of a warning. Getting into the role of any Star Wars movie, I think you have to prepare yourself to be not just famous but sometimes infamous, especially if you're dealing with fans. So Star Wars in general as a religion, yeah, I guess, like I said, nothing will surprise me, and I can only base it
The
on
way that you put that though, like, and I think Matt might agree or identify with this a little bit, because Matt, you're not like a deep like Star Wars, like Like it's like part of your life, right?
No, I don't have
know,
any.
And I
do
think
have
of J.J.
Transformers
Abrams
up
too, is
there.
like Star Wars. I'm sure J.J. Abrams is a big Star Wars fan. He got involved in these movies and all that. But when he says something like that, I sort of read it as a little bit tinged as an attack / warning about those people. The same way in which Liam Neeson referred to Star Wars fans or Star Wars as a cult. I'm an actor. And these people are crazy.
Well, isn't that to me? It's I mean, that's what happened with Connery and Bond. I think when they filmed "You Only Live Twice," when they went over Japan, it was such a phenomenon that he was like, he had no privacy because they all wanted to see get a picture of James Bond, and this was back in was that the 60s? But like, where it basically that's why he left the role. And I think that the warning of Abrams was a good one. I think that's funny that none of the people who created and helmed those sequels took that advice to heart and treated the movies with the same level of respect. But I think it's, I think that as religion has seen a decline, especially in this country, that people are replacing it with these general hero tales and they cling on to them. It's probably explains some of the success of the Marvel films, explains a lot of the fervor around Star Wars, and just the intensity of fandom in general. There's a lot of I think there's a lot of parallels between the way that people treat their favorite properties and the way that people sort of engage with religion when they in some ways. So I think it's a good analogy. Personally, I wouldn't subscribe to Star Wars as a religion. I think it's a good piece of entertainment. I
but
enjoy it a lot,
when you say that, like personally, I wouldn't. But I go back to like what my mom always said, what she still says, and it used to sound folksy and stupid, but now it sounds actually very real to me. And in my older age, is we all worship something, and you can tell what by measuring what you spend your time on. What you are spending your time on, what you're pouring into is always a form of worship or idolatry at some point. And when people think about religion, they think about these, some stuffy construct or whatever that they don't like. They don't like to think about their other communities that they might be part of that have rules and regs and norms and belief systems that you're supposed to follow. And they don't realize that they're part of a religion.
As a mediocre Catholic, if it doesn't involve lots of memorization and standing and kneeling at specific times, it's not a religion.
Except that people get together at conventions and say, "May the force be with you," and those are
it's the same
very
thing,
much the same elements.
I mean, the parallels are there, obviously, but I think, for I would say for the majority of the public, the majority of people that enjoy Star Wars as entertainment, there is that line. I mean, we have collectibles behind us, and I say when you cut me, I bleed Star Wars, but there is a line. Like I'll go to worship, and then I'll come back and enjoy Star Wars. There, for most of us, I would assume there's the line, right?
Well, it depends on what you like. The way that you're thinking about the thing, it makes a difference between whether it's worship of a good thing or idolatry of a bad. So for me, do I ascribe to Jediism? No. But I very much do view Star Wars as intrinsically a religion, and I guess one that I would say that I kind of do ascribe to. The only difference is that for me as a Christian, it's intensely allegorical. So to me, Star Wars is my Narnia. And for Christians who love Narnia, they take that and they use that, but they don't believe God is a lion. But to me it kind of feels like it's kind of a mask of the same thing where like it does not totally line up. It's never going to be a one-to-one thing. George Lucas never intended it for it to be that way. But in the same way that we, imbibe a lot of things in this world and then kind of have to take what's useful and reject what's not, and kind of, in a sense, redeem the entertainment that we're taking in. For me, like, I've had conversations about the Christian gospel with people who have no idea about any of it, and I have only used Star Wars terminology and metaphors in order to do it. So there's definitely a sense that, like, it's a language that can then be used to convey truths that I do believe are very real and very powerful.
And wasn't that George Lucas's intention to imbue these these stories of spirituality and finding yourself and stuff like that, just to get young people talking about that stuff, not necessarily to create a new religion in Star Wars, but at least have them ask the question, you know, why or why not?
And not just to, like, he was very clear that he wasn't trying to make it an allegory for any one religion, but I have always been very touched by the fact that, like, he has said that, like, he recognized that, like, this is an idea, like, the idea of spirituality is something that he felt was very needed, especially for young people. And I think that over the last 40 years, like, that truth has only become more relevant because we as a society continue to become even more secular and even more individualistic, where you have, like, Disney princess theology, which is very much just like, follow your heart and the truth is inside you. And I actually do think that, like, Christians can even be very skeptical of that, where, like, there is an element of, like, even that I think is important and helpful, but, like, the reason why I have always loved Star Wars is that how many times, like, how many other franchises do you see people who are committing their life to living as monks and, you know, bringing with that, you know, the qualities of chastity and poverty and even, you know, celibacy and all of these really, like, noble things that have been a part of not just Christian traditions, but other traditions as well, for, like, you know, people who devote their lives to something greater and then live, like, holy, like, literally, like, set apart lives because of it. I think that that's really powerful and something that you hardly ever see in anything else.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy, because I have a social and political critique about, you know, all the things that are filling the void of a society that has moved on from Judeo-Christian, you know, sort of consensus and culture, and moved away from religion and filled it with other things. That I have concerns, but Star Wars to me, like, I think about my own life and all the things that I learned from Star Wars that made me think about something bigger, that have made me better. I know that it has made me better and brought me closer to the ideal of God and made me think about that stuff. George Lucas, again, I learned this as soon as you're done reading How the Force Can Fix the World, you have to read George Lucas, A Life. And he talks a lot about his goals to try to get people to think about something bigger than themselves. And he never, again, like, fully adopted the Christian worldview, but he did adopt the view of a God, you know, a God, a deity to which we are subject. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I will make a confession on this podcast that the first time that I ever lifted my hand in church was actually after I felt like Star Wars finally guilted me into it. And so it was after the episode of Ahsoka. I've been going to church my whole life, by the way. Like, it was after the episode of Ahsoka, where Ahsoka is, like, reborn, Ahsoka the White, and she reaches out her hand to get the whale to open up and swallow them so that he can go to Peridia. And then I wrote this long essay about Star Wars and letting go, because that's what it's all about. It is about surrender. Star Wars is a story about, with the Force, letting go, dropping your ego, and surrendering to this other thing, that which has power and plans for you. And I was thinking about it in church, and they were asking us to, like, put our hands in the air. And I've been doing this for 30 years of going, no, thank you. I believe in I believe in everything you believe in, but you can't tell me what to do. And that Sunday I did. That Sunday I gave up. I was like, all right, fine. I'll do this
The
thing that you want me
libertarian
to do.
lost that day.
Yeah, it is. It's that libertarian bone of like, yeah, like we're on the same page, but I'm not part of this, like you tell me what to do, call and response kind of thing. But it was like, it really did feel, it felt right. It felt so good because I was finally like letting my guard down. And Star Wars taught me that.
I have a question. Do you think that the sort of Star Wars as a religion picked up basically around the prequels? Like, was that a thing from the original trilogy, or was that something that started after the prequels? Because that was my feeling is that like all of that stuff is sort of there in the originals, but I feel like all of that is very much more fleshed out in the prequels, and I think that's where a lot of this started. Is that correct? Am I wrong?
I mean, I'm an older fan. I'm probably older than all you guys, but I don't remember it being treated. Maybe it was treated as a religion in the OT, but I do find that there's more instances of that during the prequels. Yes, but again, it's not something that I was actively searching for or have been part of that part of the community. For my generation, my friends, I guess that my personal experience, it was just a really kick-ass franchise, a really awesome piece of entertainment that we wanted more and more and more of. It wasn't a serious, oh my God, I have to be a Jedi and change my voter registration card to Sith as my religion, or Jedi, or however you want it. Freudian slip there. I'm more Sith than Jedi, but yeah, it's interesting. I would say that each group of trilogy fans have their own wants and needs when it comes to this stuff.
George
Oh,
Lucas
we've
is
got
in the
George
chat.
Lucas trying on.
He's
Yeah.
returned.
Uh,
No, but good question from Kate J, though. Did George grow up Christian? He grew up Methodist. Family's Methodist.
And curious.
Yeah. As far as I know, culturally, just kind of church-going people. But at least from reading his biography, I didn't get the sense that, like, when he went home, his kind of Republican businessman dad was Bible thumping. So
I think that in regards to this idea of like when did this become a religion, I mean, my guess is that yeah, the content of the prequels probably had something to do with it, but it's probably less the content and more the culture, which is that during the original trilogy, you might have had individual people being like, "Hey, is this a religion? Could I treat it as a religion?" But until you have the rise of an internet culture, you don't really have a place to like literally digitally congregate, and you can't have a church, you can't have a religion unless you have more than one adherent.
mhm.
are the Lucas Star Wars movies anti-Christian? I mean, I don't
think
see
so.
that Tom Cruise nuked my account. It's if you're talking about like anti-Christian and that it's like heretical or blaspheming or whatever, then like sure, I guess, like if you're borrowing different themes from different religions, putting them in a pot, finding the things that are common between all of them, and then spitting out what we call Star Wars. Sure, but anti-Christian, that doesn't really make any sense, especially when Star Wars borrows from so many essential Christian virtues, ranging from at least humility, and needing certain kinds of saviors, letting go, and then redemption.
And it's also a matter of like how are you defining what something being anti-Christian is? I mean, is it that it had to be in the mind of the creator? And so if George Lucas wasn't pursuing that, that's anti-Christian? I mean, I guess, sure, yeah. Is it, that it has to have explicitly Christian values? Well, I mean, then, or like, like a Christian message, like, then yeah, it's probably anti-Christian. But at the same time, like I said, like if you're viewing it more as an allegory, and in this case, one that kind of just seeks to redeem the intention of the creator, You know, there for example, there are books out there too about like finding God in Harry Potter. You know, like J.K. Rowling never set out to make Harry Potter Christian, but there's a difference between like taking something in and being like, oh, this is explicitly like against, you know, the Christian message, versus kind of being able to take it and take things from it. For me, like I just kind of like, I'm reminded of the time that like I was watching Revenge of the Sith with my mom, and she had never seen it before. And there's the scene where Anakin and Yoda are talking, and Anakin's dreaming that Padme's going to die and all these things. And, you know, Yoda tells him that you have to let go. And I mean, to be very honest, I mean, until you become a fanatic and you dig into Star Wars and what exactly that philosophy entails, there are a lot of misconceptions that go around that, you know, even I held until I became like a real huge fanatic. But I was really struck by the fact that, like, you know, Yoda talks about like, you know, we let people go that we love, you know, they become one with the Force. We don't mourn them because we know that that's a good thing. And my mom kind of had this reaction that was like, well, that's wrong. And I kind of looked at her and I was like, what's wrong about it? Is it wrong like when Jesus said that unless you literally hate father and mother and husband and wife, that you can't follow him? Is it wrong in regards to the fact that the Bible literally says that we as Christians don't mourn as those who don't believe, that we have a hope because we know that our loved ones who have passed on
Mourn
are
them,
in a
do
better
not.
place?
Miss them, do not.
Yes. So
Rejoice
like
for those who become one with the Force.
yes, but I think what's so funny is that to her, like, she doesn't think in that way. So for her, as she was watching, you know, this message come out of this little green goblin, she would never think to parse that as like, does this fit in a Christian sense in that way? Whereas for me, it's like, I hear those words and that's immediately what my mind thinks.
Yeah, I mean, and this is like drawing on a line that Yoda says, like, do or do not, there is no try, is not the same as like that coming from some sort of Christian worldview, you know, and then saying like that's part of Star Wars. But I was just reading C.S. Lewis. I'm working my way through Mere Christianity. That's why I was reading it to y'all at the beginning of the stream. And I highlighted this one thing because I do a thing in all of my books where I highlight, and then I have like a section in the beginning where I mark down everything that I like from a faith perspective. And then I always save a page over here for what I like from a Star Wars perspective. Like what's the line? And I highlighted this one thing here on do or do not, there is no try. And I love this about temptation and overcoming it because I have my own vices and problems that I just can't seem to win on. And he says here, you may say that no temptation is ever overcome until we stop trying to overcome it. You have to throw up the sponge. But when you could not stop trying in the right way and for the right reason until you had tried your very hardest. Basically just saying like, you can't overcome certain temptations. Like you have to give up and you have to give it to God. This whole idea of I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to do better. That's not the way. It's you can't do this without him. And it's that requirement of surrender. It's exactly what Luke had to learn about the Force, lifting the X-Wing, that it's not about how much you try or how much you strain. It's about believing that like, yeah, I can't do this, but the Force, it's nothing. It's like lifting paper. That's what so much of Star Wars is about, is just the surrender aspect. And yeah, that's not like what do or do not, there's no try is about, but you can find that in Christianity.
And at least the Force is the lion.
I always feel like though that I you know, I think Ray was saying this a little bit, but so part of me feels like some of these movies weren't necessarily meant for the level of like
Picking apart
deep analysis that they're
I disagree.
given. And
I disagree with that.
To me, well, in the sort of this pro-Christian, anti-Christian sort of like, I wonder how much thought was, you know.
Well, let's not
I
talk
always
about the
wonder
sequel
what
trilogy
level.
because I don't think there's much thought. But
No, I always wonder what level of intent is actually put into it, and I feel like now everyone is so obsessive over world building in fiction, and then they forget to have a story, and it's all just sort of world building details. And so, you play a video game today, and it's like, oh, we've mapped out this. They've mapped out the actual religion because they've written billions of pages worth of data logs for you to
sacred
pour over.
texts. Yeah.
Yeah, which is nuts to me. And then they forget to like, oh, let's make a compelling narrative. So I do wonder, because at least, from my first viewings of Star Wars and some sequences, and we've discussed this, but I always looked at it still from the lens of being like 11. And so I've always had a harder time of like trying to really dissect them, because in my mind, they're entertainment.
I think George Lucas took this stuff very seriously. Himself as a sociologist and a studier of religions and culture. I mean, he worked and toiled on this. Ro, it was great seeing you, man. Have a good show.
Hate to do
Do it
this.
again.
Love this discussion. I'll catch it on the replay. Invite me on again if you have this similar discussion. Love you guys.
Cheers, sir.
Later.
But no, I think George Lucas took this stuff really seriously. And I think he would be delighted to see people having conversations like this, because he wanted Star Wars to lift people up and make them feel a little bit less alone in a world where he felt really, really alone. Like he just never fit in any community he ever went to. He was just always head in the clouds and thinking about these bigger ideas. Just to throw an elbow at Star Wars today, I think we're in a very different chapter. We are in Star Wars made by committee, and we are in a period of, I think we have a couple of people who are inheritors of George Lucas's ideas, imagination, and legacy, but it's different. And maybe this might be an opportunity to switch gears towards Star Wars as the Protestant Reformation and keepers of the canon. But before we do that, Jess, did you have anything you wanted to add on this strand of thought before we pivot?
Just on the idea of, is this a worthwhile subject?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that when you do look at when, George says that, even if he doesn't have a specific religion that he's pushing, that he still thinks that these concepts are important. I mean, that is, the gospel according to George Lucas. I'm not saying that we should be taking this lock, stock, and barrel, but, every creator like him, like they have a gospel. For him, that gospel included this idea that it is important for people to open themselves up to the idea that there is something grander than themselves. And even the friends that I talked to this last weekend with this group that I was with, we were having these big, deep conversations. There is no place especially with people that I don't know well. There is no place where I can share my faith as freely as when I'm talking with Star Wars fans. And in this case, like there were people who were saying the ideas and the tenets of the Jedi are what also kind of encourage them or make them curious about exploring other real world religions too. Yeah. So I think that like there's, again, it's all about kind of, I don't want to get too postmodern about the idea that we all just define this reality for ourselves, but it really is a matter of like, do you think it's worthwhile? Like if you look at, like I know that James Arnold Taylor is a great Christian. He's been asked many times, how he looks at Star Wars, and for him, like he actually doesn't really he doesn't overlay Star Wars in this kind of Christian allegory like what I'm talking about. For him, like, he might see some elements of that, but like I think that he is someone who just kind of likes to see it more as like that's entertainment and maybe there's something we can pull from it, but in general, like he's not as comfortable, or he doesn't feel the need to do that. But I think that for a lot of people, like it can be a really wonderful way to open people up to interrogating what they believe in the real world, even if, or especially if you're not actually looking at Jediism as the kind of like be all end all religion that you should ascribe to.
Yeah, and I think to take this probably to the next level here. So one of the things that I know you and I have discussed, Jess, is whether or not the new era of Star Wars under Disney is sort of workable in thinking about the schisms within the Christian church, where you sort of have these battles going on over who are actually the legitimate keepers of the canon. And I don't remember who it was that I interviewed while I was working on my book, How the Force Can Fix the World. And I'm blanking. I hate that. But this person framed the George Lucas handoff of Star Wars to Disney in the terms of the Protestant Reformation, basically being like, there was a church, with a hierarchy and a sort of claim to legitimacy over a certain set of doctrines, canon, story, and it is handed off. And then you've got this new faction, which is saying like, all right, we're making stories, we're adding to the canon, and people going, no one gave you rights or permission to do that. You have no claim. What do you think are like the interesting elements of that idea and where it doesn't work?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that it's not new.
Mm-hmm.
George created 3 movies, and then immediately there were other people who started writing books.
Mhm.
You get Splinter of the Mind's Eye right after, right after the first movie. Like
Burn them
it's
at the
Yeah.
stake.
it's not, this isn't a new thing. Now, if you are somebody if you're like a big Tolkien fan, you've got books and books and books, not only of the content of the stories, but literal reference material coming from the mind of one man who was so into this world that he was so prolific in what he produced, languages and all of these things. And so for something like that, you can see how defined Lord of the Rings and all of Tolkien's universes are by him, because he created so much.
Yeah.
It's hard. It is really hard to know that we're never going to experience Star Wars from the mind of George Lucas again, unless something absolutely miraculous happens and he comes back. I used to have a better opinion even of Dave Filoni and people like him personally. I've kind of gone off him as well. There's really no one in my mind, save for a couple of authors of some of the novels, that I really look at and I go, you get it. So what do you do with that? Well, I mean, you can either say, I'm done with new content, and you can, I think that Sam Witwer has made the argument that sometimes it's just nice to be able to look at, like, you've got 6 movies and the Clone Wars. That's
Well, I
George
think that's,
Lucas's
I mean, so
canon.
this is the thing that I slip into often as a Christian, is that I will read books about Christianity and I will recite that more than I do the scriptures, right? Like I've already like read from Mere Christianity like 2 or 3 times tonight. C.S. Lewis is not Jesus. So like what he says is ideas about the ideas about the actual scripture. And sometimes you go to those things and you go, okay, this is a book about Christianity. And then you go, oh, some of my Star Wars books by an author who I think does not get it. Then you're like, this is like fan fiction, like this is like, just because Disney gave you a paycheck and a contract, do I really take you seriously? Writing canon. And that's a religious impulse. That's a religious way of thinking.
People forget that the word canon comes from biblical arguments.
Canon is biblical.
Well,
yeah, canon is a biblical word.
Yeah.
There's an art argument to be made here too. At least I think, and it's why in my mind there's 6 movies and there's nothing else. Shadows of the Empire, actually. There's 6 movies plus Shadows of the Empire.
Shadow of the Empire.
And the comic adaptation that, and I'm blanking on the artist's name, but it's Shadows and Heir of the Empire. Cam Kennedy drew them, and they're beautiful. And they're worth it for his art alone. But I'm personally a big believer in, like, once you kind of leave the original artist that's behind it, and you can apply this to Indiana Jones, you can apply it to, I don't know, any of these franchises that have moved past their originator. I think that the future stuff is simply, content or commercial product, and lacks, these people are making something to make money, and there's less of a sort of artistic impulse behind it. And you can tell me that they can say all they want that there's an impulse, but and it's my argument against fan fiction too, which is that I think that if you really want have a story that you want to tell, like, make your own thing. It's not hard to change some pieces around.
Matt and I disagree.
I'm gonna throw hands.
Disagree.
I'm gonna throw hands here.
And make sure you reach out and hit them with your fan fiction.
That's right.
I would prefer people to make new stuff, and I would like them to take chances on their ideas. And that's, again, it's not a, like, I know that people make a lot of fan fiction, and I don't mean to say it in a dissing way, like, no, don't spend your time doing it. I would not tell anyone how to spend their time. It's more that, like, ideally, I would love people to be able to make the next Star Wars, but you don't have to.
I understand what you mean. I mean, you're tired of the recycling culture in general. I think I take umbrage at the idea that, like, fans shouldn't engage in that way. I completely agree that, like, Hollywood, is just, like, running around in circles, just like, how do we redo and revisit the same thing? But we talked about this last week, like, the magic of fans creating stories and adding to stuff in their own little bubbles is, like, the only reason these things are still alive.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is, like, so if you have that mentality of, like, oh, after you've gotten past the original creator, like, oh, we should either just share that, like, we shouldn't create anything else. Well, I mean, where would we be if after the first century of Christians, and as the Bible was put together, what if people had that in mind and St. Augustine was like, well, I can't write anything better than what Jesus said, so I'm just not gonna. Like, that would be ridiculous. And so, like the way that I look at it is, I don't agree with a lot of people's takes, but instead of looking at it like fan fiction, why don't we look at it like different, church fathers, different denominational traditions, looking at literally texts and interpreting them. So, like, for me, I loathe The Last Jedi, not because I the one thing that I do appreciate is that Rian Johnson tried to take a stand. I disagree with it entirely.
Yeah.
I think that it totally misrepresents what Star Wars is, and, like, I wouldn't even have a problem with that, except that he chose Luke Skywalker to have that message come out of. And so, like, for me, like the message that he has in that movie is one that I think very much, like, lines up with, like, some people who want gray Jedi to be a thing.
Yeah,
and
it does. Mm-hmm.
And he's got the whole stuff about, like, life and death and, like, all of this imbalance, and it just drives me nuts because, on the one hand, like, can I find a biblical parallel to that? Sure. You've got all of the talk about, like, there's a time for, living and a time for dying, a time for all of these things, but it's not reflective of this kind of ontological universe of, like, it's very dualistic. And what drives me nuts is that my understanding of this universe is one where the light is light. And there is no amount of darkness that can be added to it that would make it better. So people who are like, oh, being a gray Jedi would be wonderful because you can wield both sides. I'm like, no.
You get everything you want. That's why you like gray Jedi.
The darkness is a corruption of the light. It is evil and it's selfish. And I actually picked up on, as you were reading the C.S. Lewis quote at the beginning, what does he say? Who comes to the forefront? selfish and cruel men. That is literally Star Wars' definition of what evil is. And I actually think that this is something that is intensely helpful for not only Christians, but people in general, because define what hate is. Like Stephen, just in 2 sentences, what is hate from a general point of view?
I don't even know how to define.
You
that
don't know
in
how
a-
to define it.
Yeah.
So look at how Star Wars defines it. Star Wars looks at the dark as selfishness that then
Mhm.
like it's wanting something for your own benefit so much that you will harm other people in order to get it. And it's once you get that taste of that power and the ease by which you can bend people to your will that it corrupts you as a person and leads to more pain and more suffering. That is evil. And I actually think that that is one of the most distilled, most beautiful, most effective ways to describe what evil is. And the problem then that I have is that when you get a mentality like what Luke talks about in The Last Jedi, where it's far more malleable,
Mhm.
like it's far more like, oh, there's good and evil in the world, and it somehow comes out to balance each other out.
Yeah.
That's not what we're striving for. Yes, there's good and evil, but there's the thing that for me really defines it is that there is a quote, a couple different quotes in Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. And one, Obi-Wan reflects on his time at the temple, and he thinks about how in lessons, like they're taught that like there's darkness inside of them, and they have to essentially deny it, and they can't give into it, which is I just had, where did it go? I just had this pulled up. I was reading just in Genesis a little while back, and in the story with Cain and Abel, Cain kills his brother, and God says, why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. That's Anakin Skywalker. That is Anakin Skywalker. And it just like that is the thing where I just look at people who say like you have to find a balance between the light and the dark. And I'm like, no, balance is destroying all the Sith. And a lot of people will be like, oh, the Jedi were bad because they had to destroy all the Sith, and they call that balance. And it's like, yes, that's balance, because
I believe you're reading the introduction of my book that you because I was not prepared to be interviewed by you because everyone who reads my book, and again, I think I now disagree with a couple of my own claims. That's how writing books goes. But everyone who read my book, especially who were like conservative Christians, would then sort of like come at me with like, you're treating Star Wars an awful lot like a religion. Are you super comfortable with that? And I'm like, yeah, here's why, boom, 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 boom. And you are one of the people like me who do treat it that way. And so you were ready to like talk theology. And I have changed my opinions on balance of the light and the dark in the last 3 years. I don't feel the same way about it. And so I hear what you're saying. I applaud what you just put out there, because I think it is this sort of, I don't know, it's the yin and yang thing that I think squishy, want to have everything that makes them feel good Westerners, just want to like dip their foot into Eastern spirituality to justify feeding some of their dark side, and Christianity tells them they can't. And so they don't like that.
That's the thing, is that like the whole reason why I brought that up was like, what do we do with the new content that seems to interpret things differently? Like I said, the problem that I mainly have with The Last Jedi is that the message that I fundamentally disagree with is coming out of the mouth of Luke Skywalker, and I hate that. If it came out of any other character's mouth, I would love it, because I love seeing that this is a universe where even the Jedi don't agree on all of the precepts of their religion. And I think that that's fascinating, because there's no church in the world where you're going to go and find total uniformity.
We squabble internally. We have disagreements. Matt?
I feel like Jesse, what you laid out was a very it was extremely compelling. I thought it was super interesting. It lines up with a lot of I'm a big Ditko fan, and he veered off into he's pretty staunch objectivist, and he also created Spider-Man. No big deal. But a lot of his later works are all very. He was extremely critical of the sort of comics' push into grim and gritty, and all the heroes are gray, and there's no longer any sort of moral compass, essentially. And I thought that what you just said and laid out was very reminiscent of a lot of Ditko's sort of anger at the comics industry and what they were doing with their heroes that he spent his life building up, and how they were basically how you feel about what he did with Luke is similar to how Ditko seemed to feel about many of these other characters, which I think is very compelling.
Yeah. No, and I think exactly what you're saying about how you could have a lot of different perspectives in Star Wars and different people talking about what the Force is and how it works. But when you think about the different characters as almost like different like saint figures, they are different prophets who have different set views based on the sacred texts of the original, George Lucas. We're going to call them the original like George Lucas movies. You go, Luke would not say that. And when I hear him say that, it's not right. It rubs me wrong. And I've disagreed with a lot of friends over this issue about like what Luke does in The Last Jedi. And people get very upset about Luke would not do that. And I go, well, we don't know what's happened to him in the last, 30 years. People change. But it's true, though, that like Rian Johnson was putting his own views through the prophet, through the funnel of Luke, and you can smell it. And you go, this isn't right.
Well, they would have been better served not making it not touching the original characters, because
that's always the way to go. Don't touch them.
It muddies it up so much, and especially because I don't think that you can, unless if you're going to give, you can't. You have to give people something that they want in some way, and no one wants to see their heroes from childhood become sad, broken old men. That's just not really. It's not pleasant.
That's what I was offering with like the Indiana Jones movie that they just did, Dial of Destiny, where I was frustrated by some of the fan discussions about that movie, like when the trailer came out and Indiana Jones was like asleep on the chair with his shirt off or whatever, and people are like, they've emasculated him or whatever. Like, he is 82 years old. This is what he looks like now. You need to get over the fact that people get old. But like, what did you want? What did you want him to not be 82? Then you want a recast. But if you want Harrison Ford, he's 82.
Yeah.
I don't want them to make more. I want
right. I don't want more.
I don't need 82-year-old Indiana Jones is not.
But that's not ever what they're arguing. They're never saying we don't want any more Indiana Jones movies. They're saying we want him to be the Indiana Jones we know, and that guy doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And no, he can't.
My thing is that I don't mind the Luke in The Last Jedi from a theoretical standpoint. I like anything that takes characters and tests them and puts them through the ringer. Mm-hmm. My problem is that the premise itself, I think, is fundamentally flawed when you look at how much time has passed. If this was a movie that was 5 years, after Return of the Jedi and something bad happened and Luke had to go away for a while, sure, why not? The thing that I hate is that, and that I don't see people emphasize as much, is you tell me how it is in character for Luke Skywalker or Han Solo to leave the entire galaxy to Leia.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that I can't get over, because if they just need to go and they need to grieve, then go and grieve, and then come back and keep going in the fight. But it's the fact that Luke never comes back until he's prodded, as he knows that the galaxy is falling apart around, because he can't deal with the fact that he had this failure with the person who is now destroying the galaxy. That's the thing that I can't get over, and that's the thing that, like, no amount of reinterpretation like helps with that. I just think that the premise of the story is fundamentally flawed.
Oh yeah, for sure. 100%.
I've never been able to let go of the fact that I kind of, again, with Harrison Ford characters. So both Han Solo and Indiana Jones in
Deadbeat dads.
Destiny, well, they both say the same dialogue regarding their estranged wives. Han Solo says about Leia, quote, "She doesn't want to talk to me," right? Like, oh, I can't like talk to Leia. And then we get the Marion plot line in the new Dial of Destiny. He says the same thing. "She doesn't want to talk to me." And I'm just like, who's writing this? Like, who is writing? This is Lucasfilm. You guys have the same people in the house for these movies. Do know that you just had him say the same thing about his beloved love interest from the 80s movies? Why are you doing the same thing?
And
over over?
I mean, you bring up a good point with that, and I'll be very honest, that infuriates me, because you want to talk about emasculating characters. Quit writing men who have been, in relationships with women who can't talk to them.
Well, and they made the two of the greatest fiction heroes into deadbeat dads.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Because
that's the only way that they think that they can give those characters development after,
right?
After they've been established as family men.
Yeah, it's insane, and it's funny. I'm behind the times, but I saw the new Godzilla movie the other night, in glorious black and white, and that movie delivered a positive message, and it was so shocking in comparison to a lot of these other newer movies that are, and I know that I was previously railing about, I just leave the thing alone, don't make more of them, and I'm about to say that the new Godzilla movie was one of the best movies I've seen in ages, so I'm a hypocrite. But the fact that they could, I mean, the whole message of that movie was about living and sort of, like, it was a very shockingly positive, uplifting film when you walk out of it, and you walk out of these movies and you're like, you feel like crap because they just treat your heroes like dirt.
I was having this conversation.
What's wrong with the writers that they want that everything needs to wallow in misery all the time?
No, it's right. It's that cynical. It's a cynical culture, and you can see it based on what producers and writers you go to, based on how their stories look. I've been going through all of Taylor Sheridan's shows on Paramount. This is the Yellowstone guy, right? And he's transgressive, lives in Texas, conservative, kind of expat.
The Godfather.
Right. Yeah. So he's got like Tulsa King. He's got this special ops show called Lioness. And then he's got the Yellowstone spinoffs, 1883.
Is the Stallone one any good? Because I do like
Tulsa King's great. Tulsa King's great. I would highly recommend it. Sylvester Stallone. It's really funny. It's actually like his funny show. It's a mob feel good humor movie. But my point is like, we were watching this show last night called Lioness, and the wife is CIA, the dad is a doctor. And they've both slept with other people while she's been deployed for multiple years. And they kind of like touch on it very quickly. Like, yes, I've been with someone while you were away. Kind of like they had a handshake agreement. And then they start to like repair, not even repair. They go back to wanting to have a real marriage again. And the conversations that they have with each other and with their young daughter, who has gotten pregnant at age 14. I turned to my wife and I was like, people don't talk like this about these issues on television. Only in these Taylor Sheridan shows is the dad a good man. Is the marriage based in love? And do they have any sort of advice for their daughter besides empowerment this, empowerment that. It's just noticeably different. And in 1883, it gets talked about, like everything Taylor Sheridan does is like conservative television. And I was talking to a conservative friend, and they were like, that show was bloody. The girl had sex at 16, and she was like a Mary Sue who, you know, like feminist, you know, wanted to like go out, whatever, run around the West and be powerful. And I was like, did you miss the part where her dad was a good man and was part of her life? Because that was it. Like, that was it, that they were a family and their daughter is allowed to be an independent spirit. That doesn't make something liberal. They're a family, and that's just so rare. Sorry, just a tangent, but based on what y'all are saying.
It's just, I did not get that out of Yellowstone, but
well, 1883 Yellowstone is very like gutter television.
There's no one to root for in Yellowstone.
Yeah.
You think that you can root for one kid, and
Yeah,
then you're like,
1883 is like a very feel good story with a tragic ending, but Yellowstone is more like just like sex and legal drama. But
and I guess so that for me, like the only Disney one that's done that is I feel like the Rogue One movie was like you actually had people to root for, and I feel like they sacrificed for one another, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that there was something to me that one had a little bit more heft to it, and also it didn't really touch on. It didn't ruin or hurt, change or reconfigure anything that came before in any way for me, and so. Yeah. I connected more with those characters than anything that they did with the other sequels.
I loved this conversation, y'all. Thank you so much. I like to try to keep things to an hour to respect everybody's time, but this was fun. Jessica, it's so awesome to hear you riff on these movies. We don't get to talk enough, so we got to do this more. Thank you so much for joining us.
I feel like I learned a lot from you.
Say what, Matt?
I learned a lot from her.
I've learned a lot from her and over the years. So no, for sure. I think I hope our audience enjoyed hearing from you tonight, because I've never thought about the Force and the Jedi and the light and the dark in quite the same way as you articulated a bit ago. I'm gonna clip that and make it its own little standalone video. So this has been Bounding into Comics, Skytalker. I'm Stephen Kent. Thank you for tuning in. We do this every Thursday night at 9:30, especially when Cider, our wonderful producer, reminds me that it's coming up. I pulled together a show last minute. Thanks for tuning in, and be well, my friends. May the Force be with you.
Skytalker, presented by Bounding Into